In this video, we're talking about the Nikon Z6 and the EOS R, which one is best for videographers and filmmakers, especially now that there's an epic price drop on both of these cameras. So the EOS R has the biggest price drop of both of these cameras with a total savings of $400. They knocked $300 off of the entire body with the EOS R coming in at $1999, plus they're throwing in a free EF adapter so that you can use your EF lenses that you may have from a previous Canon DSLR. But Nikon has now cut $200 off of the total price, coming in at $1796.95. Both of these cameras now are at a price point that I feel is very competitive. If you want to see a head-to-head comparison between these two cameras, we provide a link in the description below. We did an entire video just showing an A/B test of the footage from these cameras. This video we're going to be talking about all the specs and what I feel is the best option for you. So let's start out with the Canon. The Canon comes with a 30 megapixel sensor that is the same sensor actually as the 5D Mark IV, but hey, it's a good sensor. I love it. Has dual pixel autofocus. It has the flip screen that is so nice. The camera can record 4K up to 30 frames per second, but the 4K comes at a cost with a 1.8x crop on full frame, which is really annoying. They have included C-Log and 10-bit out of the HDMI, so if you want to use this as a professional video camera, it's totally a viable option. The Nikon Z6 has a 24.5 megapixel sensor inside of it, which is very similar to the Sony a7 III and the Panasonic S1. This camera has sensor stabilization, which makes handheld footage super practical, and even using an old vintage manual lens, you can have stabilization on that footage. It can max out 4K at 30 frames per second in both full frame and crop mode, which already beats the Canon because you can actually shoot full frame 4K. And the camera has 273 phase detect autofocus points, giving it a decent autofocus system. And we'll talk more about that later. Unfortunately, there is no selfie screen or flip around screen. It's just this kind of flappy, flippy screen that is good if you're behind camera, but if you're somebody who shoots yourself all the time, I just wish I had a flip screen. Just so you have context of where I'm coming from with both of these cameras, I've actually been using both of these very heavily in my life. The Nikon Z6 has been our main shooter for the last 4 months now on the Kinetica channel. We use it for all of the videos that we shoot. We shoot 10-bit, we shoot handheld without a monopod because the IBIS, you get autofocus, but we typically shoot with manual lenses using the Atomos Ninja or the Shinobi, and we've really found that this camera has been a very useful tool for us with the Kinetica channel. The Canon EOS R has been my kind of go-to camera recently for family vlogs, for vlogs in general that I'm trying to kind of experiment with, and just taking pictures around the house and taking pictures of my son. I really think that this is kind of the perfect all-around do-everything camera. So let's go over the pros and cons of each of these cameras, and then I'll wrap it up with my overall thoughts on which one I think you should buy. Let's start off with the Canon EOS R. Color science. That is the main thing. Duh. Everybody knows this. Canon's color science is kind of the best color science that anybody's ever found. I mean, not ever in the whole wide world, but everybody talks about it all the time. The Canon color science really holds true to all this mythology that it has. It, for some reason, just looks correct. It looks right. Basically, with very little effort, you can get an image that just looks really pleasing to the eye. The skin tones look good, the highlights look great, the shadows look great, the overall color of greens, blues, everything just looks good. Now, that doesn't mean that it's actually correct, because if you look at the sensor on a Canon, typically the reds and oranges are kind of all over the place, making the blues look weird, and things just don't come out the way that it should actually technically be. But that's because the color science has been designed to favor skin tones and make things feel more filmic and, I don't know, just more beautiful. And that's something that a lot of cinematographers, filmmakers, and shooters have come to know with the Canon system, and that's probably one of my favorite things about the EOS R. The second thing that I really love about it, it's really dumb and vain, right? But it's actually the fact that it has this, a flippy selfie screen. I know that I'm probably a little biased here because I am a YouTuber and I do this every single day for my job, and I need to see myself when I'm working, when Connor's not operating the camera. But the truth is even when I'm taking pictures or when I'm filming my son, I find it to be super valuable to have this. I wish that a flip screen like this could just be an add-on to any camera that you get. You know how when you buy a new Mac on Apple.com, you can select different features? I wish you could just I would pay like $300 to get this on this. Like, I'm dead serious. I would pay extra money to have this. And I know there's a lot of other people that would as well. I love having this on my camera, and it's a shame that this camera doesn't have it, or it doesn't have the option to have it. The other thing with the Canon EOS R that I really love is, of course, the autofocus. If you haven't heard this about Canon, their dual pixel autofocus has been kind of class leading for several years, and as they continue to update the processors, it just continues to get more reliable and more accurate. In fact, the test that we did, that we've linked below where you can see the autofocus test, was using an older firmware that we just didn't have yet that has now been available, and the new firmware is even better. It's giving us full eye detection and face detection in video mode, and it's extremely accurate. I've heard a lot of people talk highly about it in their professional use, and when you're using a system like this, you can kind of just trust that your face, that your objects that you're pointing at are going to be in focus. I just trust it, and that's one thing that I really love, especially as a YouTuber. All right, so there is an elephant in the room about this camera, and if you haven't heard already, there is an extreme crop in the 4K mode on this camera. I've heard both sides of this argument with the crop on this camera. I've heard people say that they don't care, it doesn't matter. I've heard people say that the crop is crap. I'm kind of in the crop is crap mode, honestly, because I think that the problem with the crop is not the fact that there is a crop, because we're actually shooting this video right now on an X-T3 from Fuji, which is a crop sensor camera. The problem is not the fact that there's a crop. The problem with the crop for me is the fact that the lens ecosystem for a cropped Canon with good, reliable autofocus that's not loud and noisy, that has fast aperture with IS, because this camera doesn't have IBIS, is extremely minuscule. I mean, honestly, this lens that I have on here is a $250 lens. It's a cheapo crap lens. But the only reason I'm using it on here is because this is literally the best 16 to 35 alternative for the crop on this camera. Canon doesn't make a 10 to 18 f1.8 with IS. That would be incredible. That would solve the problem with the crop. Micro Four Thirds, for example, has a 2x crop. I don't care about that. I don't complain about that because there's a ton of lenses for it. There's a 12mm f1.4 lens that's available on Micro Four Thirds if you want wide angle with shallow depth of field. That exists. That's the problem. There are no 10 or 12mm f1.4 lenses that I can put on here to fix the fact that there's a crop on it. Now, there are some EFS lenses that are rather decent, so you can use lenses like the infamous Sigma 18 to 35 f1.8, which I have been considering getting. But the problem with that is it's designed for an APS-C crop, which is around a 1.5x, so that 18mm is a true decent wide angle. But the crop on this is not even APS-C. It's more than that. It's a 1.8x. That means that the Sigma 18 to 35 at 18mm is not as wide as it really can be on a true APS-C body. So really, that's my biggest headache with this camera with the 4K mode. It's not the fact that the 4K sucks. I think the 4K looks amazing. The colors are great. The sharpness is great. I think the 10-bit on it is incredible, and we'll talk more about that later. The problem is this lens ecosystem is not designed around the crop on this camera. So in my opinion, the crop is crap. The reverse argument of that is, well, if you want full frame, just shoot 1080p. And my argument back to that is, well, the 1080p is decent, it's fine, but I mean, it's really not 2012 anymore, guys. We need 4K full frame, and that's where Canon is really showing its age with its design. Sony and Nikon and all these different people like Panasonic are pushing the boundaries because, well, let's face it, they're using Sony technology, and Sony's just really pushing the technology forward, giving us 4K 60, full frame, who knows what the A7S is gonna do. And Canon, unfortunately, is using the same sensor from the 5D4. That camera came out 4 years ago, so this camera is just really behind. The 1080p is soft. It's not terrible in full frame. It's totally passable. People like Matty Hapauja and Peter McKinnon, they're doing it. They're using this in full frame. Potato Jet is also using it in full frame. And their views and their subscriber base speaks for itself, right? Like 4K really doesn't matter. The problem is it's not the best, and I know it can be better. However, in the crop mode on this camera, not the 4K mode, but the cropped 1080p mode, which you would think would be an APS-C crop, but it's actually the same crop as the 4K. 1.8x. So I noticed actually that the 1080p files from the crop mode on this camera are super sharp. They look 4K, but they're not. They're 1080p, so the file sizes are smaller. It's easier to edit on your computer if you have an older computer. So if 1080p really is good enough for you and you don't want to hassle with 4K, then shoot in the cropped 1080p mode. But then you're dealing with the whole issue that I said earlier with the crop and the lack of lenses in that ecosystem. So kind of a big headache, a big pain in the butt, really. But the fact is, this camera does have full frame 1080p. The autofocus works great. The color looks great. You can't shoot 10-bit, by the way, in 1080p, only in 4K. So let's talk about that then. 10-bit on this camera. You can actually output 10-bit from the HDMI onto an Atomos Ninja 5, which is what we did in our comparison. I really think that this is the ideal way to get professional video on this camera. If you have a C300 or a C200 and you need a backup camera, this camera with an Atomos Ninja 5 shooting Canalog in 10-bit is totally good enough for a B camera in that scenario. I've been very impressed with the overall image quality. Again, the color is perfect, the autofocus is great. And you can also buy that little adapter that Canon makes to give you built-in ND using the adapter. I really love that adapter. I want to pick one up for myself. I haven't gotten one yet. Overall, I feel like Canon has done a very good job with giving us things that are kind of like a tease. It's teasing me. The image quality is great, the 10-bit's great, but the 4K crop is terrible. You can't do 60 in the crop mode. You can only do 60 in full frame, so now it's soft. And then the slow-mo on this camera is terrible as well. You can do 120 frames per second, but only in 720p. That's right, it's 2019. And they're selling this camera brand new. This is their flagship mirrorless camera, and it shoots 720p, 120 frames per second. That, again, is a very big sign that Canon is way behind Sony in their processing and sensor department. They have a lot of work to do in Japan making this stuff better. They have to do it. They're too focused on lenses, which is okay. I like their lenses, good lenses. By the way, there's gonna be some incredible lenses coming soon for this mount. There's a 15 to 35 2.8 with IS, 24 to 70 2.8 with IS, a 70 to 200 f2.8 with IS. That's great. I'm excited about that. Lenses are good. Canon makes great lenses. Now that I've rambled a bunch about the EOS R, let's move on to the Nikon Z6, which again has been our main flagship camera that we've used here at Kinotika. The number one thing that I really miss when I pick this up, when I'm used to using this, honestly isn't really the full frame 4K, it's the internal body image stabilization, or the IBIS, or VC, whatever Nikon calls it. The stabilization on this camera is really good. It reminds me a lot of the Panasonic GH5. If you're familiar with that camera, it has really great stabilization. The EM1X that we reviewed also has incredible stabilization. It's not as good as that. But the stabilization on here is really handy dandy using manual lenses, which is honestly the way we shoot most of the time because unfortunately the autofocus for us has not been that reliable. I think if you're a vlogger or you're just shooting your face and that's it all the time, the face tracking works rather decent. It performs fairly well. The problem we've had with it in the way that we shoot is Connor will film me, and then maybe I'm holding a camera and he wants to zoom in and focus on the camera. Well, when he zooms in, for some reason, the camera just won't focus on whatever I'm holding or things that I hold in front of the lens. It just doesn't know what's going on. It just seems like a really kind of stupid autofocus system. So I hope that they continue to upgrade this over time. I'm sure they will. It's a brand new system. They really need to update the firmware to give us better and more reliable autofocus. Sony is totally eating their lunch when it comes to autofocus performance. And in this case, Canon totally beats this camera when it comes to autofocus. So we choose to shoot on vintage lenses, which make us think more. It makes us better filmmakers. And I think the bokeh looks better anyways. Obviously, the 4K full frame is fabulous. It's great to have sharp, clean, good 4K, up to 10-bit again out of the HDMI. And if you haven't heard, this camera is going to give us raw recording with the Atomos Ninja 5. We don't know all the specifications of that. We don't know if it's going to be full frame or if they'll crop on that image. We'll have to see when it comes out and we'll let you know. But ProRes RAW is something that I'm really excited about trying out with this camera. having the flexibility of RAW, but the power of ProRes. So I'm really excited about using this camera with the RAW mode with our Atomos Ninja 5. But I do think overall this camera is just laid out better. We have a little nipple here, which is great. I love nipples. They're so great. We don't have a nipple on this camera. Why won't you give us a nipple, Canon? They give us this stupid little touch bar here, by the way. It's so terrible. I've disabled it. But yeah, we get a nipple here. We get great switching between photo and video. This is what I love. This is the old standard here. The Canon 7D had this, and then all the Canon cameras ended up having this. The 1DX has it. You have a video switch and a photo switch. It saves all your photo settings. It saves all your video settings. This is so invaluable for us as YouTubers because we take pictures for Instagram, we take pictures for YouTube thumbnails, and then we switch over and go back to video mode. This camera, you have to push the mode button, and then you push the info button, and then you have to scroll over and select manual. It's just a big pain in the butt. It's like 2 or 3 extra steps. It makes me confused every time I do it. There's nothing confusing about this switch. I love the switch. Also, the future with this looks bright with this massive, huge front element mount. Now the Nikon mount here is much bigger than any other mount. I think it's actually the biggest mirrorless mount that I've ever seen, next to a medium format mount, of course. And what that means is the lenses are actually able to be smaller than they have to be for a standard EF mount, for example. This lens is a really nice compact lens, and all of Nikon's Z mount lenses are very compact and small. They have this little retracting mode here, which makes it super small for travel. I'm not a huge fan of it because oftentimes when I'm about to shoot, I maybe forget that it's in compact mode. I'm like, why does my image suck? And then it's like, oh, it's in compact mode. But regardless, the lenses look great. The color science on this camera is much better than that of Sony, even though it is probably using the same sensor as a Sony a7 III. Nikon has a much better interpretation of color, in my opinion. They're a company just like Canon who's been around for a very long time. They've been making lenses, they've been making cameras forever. So it's a very nice thing to have a new Nikon mirrorless camera that's actually a real competitor when it comes to video. Slow motion on this camera is great. We get 120 frames per second in 1080p, and it looks sharp, it looks clean. I would totally use this in a professional environment. Not only does the slow-mo look great, but you keep the audio if you want, and you get full-time autofocus. Compared to the EOS R, no audio and 0 autofocus. So you're getting 720p with no audio and no autofocus. Manual focus only, which is super annoying because a lot of times when you're doing something in slow-mo, somebody's running towards you or things are moving at you or moving away from you and you want to have focus. So the slow-mo and the 4K modes on this camera are a huge win. If I didn't mention before, we do have 4K in full frame and in crop mode, which is great. That means that if you need a little extra range, for example, this lens goes to 70 millimeters, say that's just not enough, I can go into the crop, or they call the DX mode, and get a little extra range. It actually takes it to an APS-C crop. Now the image in the crop mode is not going to look as good as the full frame because the full frame is going from a 6K sensor down to 4K. The crop mode is actually doing, I guess, a little bit of pixel magic or something to give you 4K on a crop. So you're not getting the crisp, perfect, moire-free image, but it totally looks great. And the fact that I can do 4K in full frame and crop, I always love that. I want it. I want it on everything. And again, I want to just reiterate, we did do a comparison between these two cameras, so if you haven't seen it, definitely check out the video because all this talk about this without seeing the actual footage means nothing. So I want to tell you what my overall thoughts are on both of these cameras and which one you should get. But first, a message from our sponsor today, Squarespace. I'd like to take this moment to talk about our sponsor today, Squarespace, the ultimate place to build your website or get your domain. Make sure to go to squarespace.com/Kino to get 10% off your first purchase there. I'm building my website on Squarespace right now. I highly recommend you do the same. It's super important to have a place where all your stuff can live outside of YouTube, outside of Vimeo, outside of Instagram, for people to find your work and to reach out to you and contact you. You never know what could happen with somebody searching your name on Google and finding your website with your Squarespace account. So do it now, squarespace.com/Kino. See ya. So this is it, the end of the video. Which camera do I like the best? Okay, I'm just gonna give you one answer because I know that's what you want. You don't want me to beat around the bush and give you this one's good for this and this one's good for that. Well, if you asked me like literally 2 months ago, I would have said this one here because it's all we used. But I'm just gonna be dead honest here. I like this one the best. It doesn't make any sense. There's something about Canon. There's just something that frustratingly, stupidly, that I hate about Canon. And it's the fact that every time I use a Canon camera, I'm just overjoyed with the images I get. Forget about the crop, forget about all its limitations with 720p slow-mo, soft 1080p full frame. The fact is, the image quality coming off of this is so easy to handle in post. You barely have to do anything when you're color grading. And for some reason, when you just look at the image, it just looks right. It looks so filmic. It looks so good. And if I had it my way, I would shoot everything on this with a really nice 10-18 with IS f1.4 lens. That would be nice. That's my biggest problem with it is I want to love this camera so much because we have this flip screen, we have 10-bit, we've got great color science, but there's no lenses that are good for the crop. So I'm really just kind of hoping that Canon's gonna do something about this ecosystem, that we're gonna get a new EOS R that'll do full frame 4K, that'll have IBIS, and the rumors state that we will have IBIS on a Canon camera. There's a new R camera coming hopefully this year that's going to be a higher resolution, more pro body. Higher resolution doesn't sound good to me because higher resolution doesn't necessarily mean good for video, so we'll just have to see. I would honestly just have to say this about Canon as a company. If it sounds too good to be true, it definitely is. Canon has never satisfied anybody with the cameras that they release when you have all these rumors and buildup. Everybody always wants exactly what everybody else is doing with Canon. So they just expect that the next flagship camera that Canon's going to release is going to have all the things that everybody else has. And so they just anxiously wait for, oh, I'll just wait for the next EOS R. The truth is like, I swear to you, they're never going to give you what you want. Canon is probably the worst company out of all the companies ever to give their customers what they actually want. But at the end of the day, it's a comfortable system to use. I know the menu system back and forth. The mode dial thing is annoying, the lack of a nipple is annoying, but the color science looks great. The autofocus is perfect, and I have a flip screen that actually helps me when I'm shooting video. Now, with the Nikon Z6, again, a totally viable option. We're going to continue to use this as a professional tool for us because we need full frame 4K. We need IBIS. We need 10-bit. We need RAW, hopefully. Well, that'll be fun. And I just think overall, for somebody who has a shooter who is a shooter, like somebody shooting weddings or documentaries or films, this camera is a better deal. It gives you everything that you need. IBIS, decent autofocus, full frame 4K, cropped 4K, 10-bit, great color science, nice lens lineup. And the body itself is just designed nicely. You have a nice dedicated ISO button. We got a white balance button here, a nipple, a switch, everything. It just works really well. And this camera is kind of annoying to use because the button layout's really kind of just frustrating here. The image quality on this isn't as good, in my opinion, as this when you're shooting 10-bit 4K. And that's really where it comes down to. Like, overall, just straight out of the box, the Canon's just always going to knock it out of the park. When we did our comparison video using the 10-bit in-log footage, it was kind of a hassle to correct it and pull the greens out and make sure the shadows were all right. And the truth is, with the Canon log, they've designed it in such a way that you do save your highlights and shadows decently, but it doesn't require a ton of grading. You just kind of pull your shadows down, adjust your highlights, add just a little bit of saturation, and boom, it's in. It's perfect. This camera just requires a little bit more fiddling, and if you're good in Resolve or you're somebody who knows what you're doing, this camera is going to be a great tool for you. And I think, again, overall, this system here has way more to it than this. But if you're wanting to spend $2,000 on an all-around camera, for me, this camera here, believe it or not, even though it only does, oh my gosh, only does 1080p full frame, not 4K full frame. And even though it does not have IBIS on the sensor, this camera, for some freaking reason, is amazing. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsor today, Squarespace, for making this video possible. If you're interested in picking up the EOS R or the Nikon Z6, please consider using the affiliate link that we provided below. It really helps this channel out and we greatly appreciate it. Also, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. If you watched all the way to the end, that means you're a fan, right? So join the squad and hit the subscribe button. Once again, I'm Dave Mays. These are two cameras under $2,000 that are actually better options than the A7 III in my opinion. See you next time.